Chair recognizes the honourable member for Fort Charlotte.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just wish for the record to reflect that on past occasions when you have said that oftentimes when you make rulings, as controversial as they may be, you have drawn the ire of members on both sides of this House. Mr. Speaker, I was one of those people that you were referring to when you said that. And I just want to tell you, and to tell the entire Bahamas, that you have thrown a major blow for democracy in this place tonight, Mr. Speaker. And I am eternally indebted to you. And the people of Fort Charlotte are as well. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to say that it is my fervent hope that Bahamians watching what has transpired in here tonight do not associate the actions perpetrated by the leadership of the Progressive Liberal Party with all of the members of the Progressive Liberal Party seated here. Because I can say without fear of contradiction, Mr. Speaker, and I am very happy to have received words of encouragement and support from other members of the Progressive Liberal Party who are members in this place, who believe, just like the founders of the Progressive Liberal Party, that there was no place in any democracy for the suppression of free speech and freedom of assembly, who fought the oppressors of the pre-majority rule Bahamas to ensure that each and every Bahamian had a right to be heard and to be given every opportunity to be a fully invested Bahamian in the Commonwealth of Bahamas.
Point of order. Chair recognizes the member for Cat Island, Rum Kings, and Salvador.
I move the motion, Mr. Speaker. Let me say, for the record, that the intent of that motion had nothing to do with Fort Charlotte or whether he spoke. As you pointed out, he has absented himself in respect to this motion that we are under discussion, which I move closure for from the House. This has nothing to do with free speech or suppression of speech. There are many other forums for which he wants to speak, he can speak. So to suggest what I invoked was the rule of this House, which I'm entitled to do. Right? Any other member is entitled to do that. And so it is a stretch for the member to suggest that a rule that is in the House is designed to suppress and/or to deter free speech. I invoked the rule of the House. That's all I did. And I did not do it. It had nothing to do with him. It had to do with governance. And the executive wanting to move on with governance.
Thank you, honourable member. Member for Fort Charlotte.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for the record, I was seen by Doctor last week and was off the island, and I apologize to you and to this House for not communicating with you to advise you as to the reason for my absence. On Monday past, I intended to come in here to make my contribution, but I was rather surprised that the House was prematurely adjourned. But, Mr. Speaker, the facts are that two very outspoken members of the Progressive Liberal Party, in the persons of the member for Engliston and the member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini, stood on their feet and argued vociferously for the right for the member of Mayaguana, Inagua, Crooked Island, Acklands, and Long Key to be heard in this place. They fought for his right to be able to speak and be heard by the people who put him in this place. And I find it extremely ironic, contradictory, and hypocritical for these same members to not fight for my right to enjoy the very same.
Point of order. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Rum Key, and San Salvador.
Point of order. Point of order. The conduct of those who sought to silence the member from Michael, right, is against the rules. Was against the rules. That is what we were speaking about. Was against the rules. And no one is pounding the desk to drown him out. As I repeat, I invoke the rules. If you don't like the rules, then move to change them. That's all. I invoke the rules. Abide by the rules. That's all I ask. And to stretch the application of my right to engage the rules in the conduct of the business of this house, to trying to suppress the member. Again, as I said, it's not about you, man. It's not about the member of Fort Charlotte. It's about governance.
Thank you, honourable member. Member for Kalani, your purpose for rising.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, to correct the member, when we attempted to stop the member from Michael to speak, us banging on the table is totally irrelevant in this particular situation, because those members said each and every member has a right to speak in this parliament. That was their argument.
That was the ruling from the chair.
We agree with your ruling, Mr.
That was the ruling from the chair.
Speaker.
Member for Anglican.
Thank you, Speaker. I see the member for Fort Charlotte has decided to draw me into his debate. And no problem. I certainly will respond. Mr. Speaker, when the member for Michael was speaking, he stood up at his assigned time, and he was trying to speak. The opposition sought to stop him. In this case, the member for Cat Island, Rum Key, and San Salvador moved for closure. It was seconded. You have since ruled, Mr. Speaker. I supported the motion. I didn't get the chance to vote. That's the difference between the member for Fort Charlotte said he was sick and off the island, etc. And I don't doubt his word. He's been in the media quite a bit, and maybe from abroad he was doing this. But the point I'm making, Mr. Speaker, is that he was apparently advised that he should speak this morning. He wasn't here. I don't know if he probably didn't get the message. But he has decided, apparently, he will speak when he chooses to do so. I believe he's a member of our side. We are guided by our leader in this house. I'm guided. He says, speak now, I speak now. He says, don't speak, I won't speak. I'm guided by that. That's what happens on this side as a member of the Progressive Liberal Party in the governing party. So, Mr. Speaker, for the member for Fort Charlotte, in terms of his assertion of hypocrisy, there's a distinct difference between the two cases, Mr. Speaker. Distinct difference. And the difference is that this member had the floor and was entitled to speak. In the case of this, I supported the motion. So why would I? The member had many opportunities to be in here. He's chosen to the last hour to come in this house and speak. Even after the leader of opposition, who complies with the order of the house. This member does not wish to comply, Mr. Speaker. So don't draw me into your debate, Fort Charlotte. Don't draw me into your debate.
Thank you, honourable member. Thank you, honourable member. Member for Fort Charlotte.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, it is my hope that the Bahamian people, because I say this with all sincerity, there are some very, 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 very good people in this same Progressive Liberal Party in this House of Assembly. But quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, they know, and I make it clear, I do not agree with the position of all of my colleagues. What happened in here tonight is no reflection on those who did not support the act that they tried to perpetrate earlier. But what happened in here this evening was an abysmal failure of leadership. And to think that a man who stands to his feet at every opportunity and says that he has served for 40+ years, 41 to be exact, as a member of this great house, I cannot, for the life of me, understand how he could seek to perpetrate what he did in here this evening.
Very well. Point of order. Before the member for Yamacraw is recognized, I just wanted to caution member for Fort Charlotte. When you say the man, the connotation may be appear to be disrespectful. So I would just caution the member to say the member or the right honourable member would be more appropriate wording to use. Member for Yamacraw, you recognize.
Mr. Speaker, a point of order. First of all, Mr. Speaker, the member of Fort Charlotte is being very dishonest. Mr. Speaker, what is happening here is not an abysmal lack of leadership, but an abysmal lack of discipline, an abysmal lack of respect, and an abysmal lack of fellowship. Nothing to do with leadership, fellowship. And Mr. Speaker, I sat here all evening and saw the member taking his instructions from the member for Kalani, even right to the very point just now. So, Mr. Speaker, if the member is honest, he should do what he intends to do or what he's acting like, Mr. Speaker. But okay. It is an abysmal lack of fellowship. It has nothing to do with leadership.
Member, very well. Member for Yamacraw, though. Member from Yamacraw, you imputed a motive based on what you saw, and it gives an appearance, and I don't think that would be fair to both members to do so. And so I just want to caution all members to, as we go forward, to stay on the high road. Member for Kalani.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I take grave reservations for the member stating that I'm giving such instructions. The member has been totally independent and has spoken his mind throughout this parliament continuously. He has been taking no orders from Kalani. He thinks for himself and he expressed his views and is guided by his conscience.
Thank you, honourable member. Member for Fort Charlotte.
Mr. Speaker, this has given me a perfect segue into the contribution that I shall make tonight.
Make a contribution.
Because, Mr. Speaker, the mere fact that we live in a society where politicians on opposite sides cannot even sit next to each other without being accused of improper motives speaks to the kind of poor society and undemocratic society in which we live. Mr. Speaker, for the member for Yamacraw to say that because the member for Kalani sat next to me means that he was giving me instructions tells me just how shallow a member I'm dealing with.
Careful, member.
It's wrong, because the member from Kalani did not give me instructions, Mr. Speaker.
You can't get personally, you can't get personal like that. You can't get personal to the member like that.
I apologize, Mr. Speaker. I sincerely apologize. I'm bothered by that. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry. I apologize to this House.
It'll be long this evening like that, man. It'll be long like that this evening.
Mr. Speaker,
You can't let nobody intimidate you.
I dedicate this contribution to my great-grandfather, Feely Demerit, of Market Street in the city of Nassau, and to Alonzo Augustus Cartwright of Buckley's, Long Island. Men of unimpeachable character and men of indefatigable intestinal fortitude. In October of 2009, the member of Bamboo Town and I, then members of the fledgling National Development Party, attended the PLP's National General Convention at the Crystal Palace Ballroom here in New Providence. On the convention's closing night, the member and I were invited to speak with the chairman of the party, Mr. Bradley Roberts, who received us warmly. We expressed to Mr. Roberts our dissatisfaction with the state of affairs in the country and the lack of growth and development in the country, and the fact that the major political parties were averse to internal change. Without that change, we felt that there was no realistic prospect for advancement in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Roberts responded passionately, and his words were, and I quote, "If you want to change things, you have got to come into the party to change it. You cannot do it from the outside." Mr. Roberts was persuasive because he seemed genuine, and the member for Bamboo Town and I believed that the PLP was open to internal reform. This paved the way for what transpired in the future, when the members of the National Development Party joined forces with the Progressive Liberal Party, with a commitment that we would remain true to our principles and try to change the party from within. I will leave it up to the public to judge whether our actions were noble or naive. But suffice it to say that with experience comes wisdom, Mr. Speaker. The role of a backbencher is to speak truth to power and to nurture a democracy that is stronger by challenging the executive to perform better in the interests of those who rely on representation of their voice in the legislature. I remain committed to fighting for a better Bahamas and building a more vibrant democracy via my representation of the Bahamian people in this place. However, the political culture within the PLP remains one that is regrettably most undemocratic. Our party has had no party convention since 2009, which suggests that the leaders of the party have no interest in permitting challenges to the party's status quo and are still fiercely resistant to change within the organization. The utterances by senior members of the party suggest absolute contempt for young Bahamians. The clear message is that there is no room for dissenting views in the PLP, and the party is not in tune with the aspirations of young Bahamians. According to Bradley Roberts, Greg Moss had zero chance of being renominated by the Progressive Liberal Party. I have been told that the same applies to me. My response is simple, Mr. Speaker. The PLP, on its current trajectory, stands zero chance of being re-elected as government. Only the ignorance of Mr. Roberts' arrogance could prevent him from recognizing his role in the PLP's declining popularity.
Point of order. Chair recognizes member for West.
Mr. Roberts is not in this place, and that is prohibited. And the member who has served as whip in this parliament knows better. And the member should know that that is not acceptable. If you wish to speak of any matter, you speak to other matters. You don't speak to matters pertaining to someone who's not in this place to defend themselves.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Fort Charlotte, particularly because of the private conversation that it appears that you have had with the member, with the individual, the public or private citizen. I would just caution you with the details of it. You may continue.
Mr. Speaker, you know, the reason I say what I say, and these words were put on my heart, and it's interesting how things transpired tonight, because I didn't come in this house with any intention of resigning. But how things have happened in here tonight, God is speaking to me, Mr. Speaker. And I'm going to read everything that I have on this paper. And if you find it wrong, you let me know and I'll apologize. But Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the majority of Bahamians believe that Mr. Roberts needs to be permanently put out to political pasture so that they no longer have to hear him bray and bray and bray. However, this approach of agitating from the political backbench is bringing about change in our politics. Evidence can be found in the environmental protection legislation put forward by the government in the aftermath of the call for a select committee to investigate the particulars surrounding the Rubis oil spill and the release of the draft Freedom of Information Act legislation, notwithstanding the public doubts about government sincerity in these actions. I was told that I spoke out of turn when I told the media that the value-added tax rate should be lowered. But it sparked public debate, Mr. Speaker, that ultimately saw the rate cut by some 50%. During this year's mid-year budget exercise, I said I could not support another tax on the backs of the Bahamian people, and that I would oppose the implementation of a national health insurance tax at a time when our economy could not support a new tax on the heels of value-added taxation. I was criticized for being opposed to the principles of the PLP by the member of Elizabeth, of all people, for having expressed my objections to the imposition of a new tax during this time. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, subsequently echoed my view by stating that an NHI tax would hurt our economic recovery. The result has been that just 2 months after the Minister of Health announced that the government would be introducing a new NHI tax by January of 2016, the Prime Minister in his budget communication just 2 weeks ago has withdrawn government's earlier stated intention to impose the new tax until the economy can sustain its implementation. That is exactly what I urged the government to do when I spoke during my mid-year contribution, Mr. Speaker, and they have endorsed my view with their most recent action. So don't tell me that our country is not being well served by politicians prepared to put country before party. Our country is not well served by politicians who put their political preservation ahead of the public's need for representation. On the matter of political agitation, Mr. Speaker, the handling of the Rubis oil spill severely undermined the government's credibility in relation to its narrative that NHI symbolizes the government's interest in protecting the health of the Bahamian people. I fully expected that when the member for Bamboo Town and I called for the formation of the Select Committee, we would be joined by both the government and the opposition in demonstrating our commitment to protecting the interests of the Bahamian people. Instead of choosing transparency and accountability and promotion of the public interest, we were shockingly opposed by a government that acted as though they had a lot to hide. When the Minister of Health stood in this House in response to a question I posed about a NHI tax, he said very matter-of-factly, if you are black and you are poor, you are sure to die. To quote him correctly, he said, if you are black and you are poor, you die. Surely a tax is better than death. I say to this government, in similar language, surely a select committee to investigate the factors surrounding the Rubis oil spill and response to that spill would have been better than being stained with the reputation that this government is more concerned with political preservation than the preservation of the lives of the people affected by a toxic oil spill. Mr. Speaker, the government has assigned a theme to this year's budget of a stronger Bahamas. However, to this country's tremendous disadvantage, since 1967 we have practiced a brand of politics in this country that can only be described as the politics of exclusion. You cannot have a stronger Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, when your political policies promote a divided Bahamas. Over the 48 years of majority rule government, we have nurtured a PLP Bahamas and a FNM Bahamas, a black Bahamas and a white Bahamas, and a Bahamas that has yet to be defined, which covers those living in this country for decades who have yet to be properly accounted for. We must strive to create a Bahamas where all of its constituent groupings are proud to be a part of this country. I represent the constituency of Fort Charlotte. And yes, it is true that those who voted for me are classified as supporters of the Progressive Liberal Party. However, the indisputable fact is, Mr. Speaker, those people were the minority of voters that voted in Fort Charlotte on May 7, 2012. Like those in Bamboo Town, Carmichael, Elizabeth, Garden Hills, Golden Isles, Marathon, Mount Moriah, Seabreeze, South Beach, Southern Shores, Marco City, North Andros and Mangrove Key, and South Andros. That totals 14 seats where the PLP polled less votes than voters who supported another party in the last election. What this means is that those of us who fall into this category would be foolish to proclaim that we represent PLP constituencies. Therefore, this politics of exclusion is not conducive to one's political survival if they happen to represent seats where non-PLP supporters form the majority of voters in their constituencies. However, for these 48 years, in the main, our nation's leaders have preached the politics of exclusion and division. After every election, the winning side exalts that it's our time now, and as a result, nothing happens for the majority of Bahamians who comprise the opposition. Opportunities are not afforded on the basis of merit, but on the basis of one's political affiliation. The result is that we have created angry, rabid political partisans who believe that it is normal to be victimized when their party is not in power. Under these conditions, patriotism and economic growth are severely retarded, and this is the Bahamas that majority-rule governance has created, and that far too few on the governing side have demonstrated an interest in trying to change. Yet many of us come in here and have the audacity to bang giddily on these desks when the Prime Minister declares that we are about building a stronger Bahamas. We cannot build a stronger Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, when our leaders, both PLP and FNM, believe that when they are in office, only PLPs or FNMs can receive jobs or contracts with their government. That is exactly what we have now. And it surprises me that any campaign to build a stronger Bahamas has not been accompanied by a government press release announcing the abolition of selective tendering. Until there is evidence that we use merit as the primary qualification in these matters, we know that the Stronger Bahamas campaign is nothing more than empty political talk, lacking sincere motives. Mr. Speaker, as politicians, we cannot continue to preach this politics of exclusion and division and sincerely expect that our country will grow stronger. Bahamians, PLPs, FNMs, and DNAs have every right to expect that they can survive and even thrive regardless of the party in power. However, we are nowhere near that reality in the Bahamas of 2015. In Fort Charlotte, there is only one Bahamas, where the views of PLPs, FNMs, and DNAs are treated equally. I cannot afford to only speak up for the PLPs in Fort Charlotte when I speak in this place. I would only be speaking for the minority of voters of Fort Charlotte if I did. Similarly, I would not be representing Fort Charlotte well if I only spoke for the majority of the constituents of Fort Charlotte and ignored the views of the minority who support the PLP. We must all strive to speak on behalf of all constituents, irrespective of which party they identify with. That is the only way we will truly build a stronger Bahamas. So when I speak in this place, I dare not make the mistake, Mr. Speaker, of ignoring the realities and views of the majority of people who voted in Fort Charlotte. The reason this country is not strong is because politicians, while in government, are more concerned with their political self-preservation than they are about national development. That is why we witnessed the Rubis debacle. That is why our government condones judicial interference by members of the executive. That is why our government seeks to stifle transparency and accountability in the BAMSI fiasco. That is why our government condones one of its executive members walking out of a ministry directly into a bank regulated by that ministry. That is why a parliamentary secretary could be wrongly held responsible for wrongdoing without any explanation by this nation's leadership concerning the facts surrounding that controversial matter. And that is why our nation's House could actively undermine its most vital instrument of fiscal oversight by depriving the Public Accounts Committee of its constitutional powers to hold the government accountable for its financial stewardship of our nation. These are the issues that Bahamians want the government to come clean on, Mr. Speaker. Bahamian constituents who are not blinded by party loyalty, but who recognize that we can only build a stronger Bahamas if we embrace a stronger democracy. In order to embrace a stronger democracy, we must have an unshakable commitment to transparency and accountability. In this regard, I support an audit of BAMSI by the Public Accounts Committee because recent history has shown that there is reason to scrutinize the operations of the program to guard against any other occurrence that is harmful to the public's interest. I continue to wonder why the government insists on hiring a foreign national in possession of questionable credentials to help oversee the financial management of the institute. Is there a lack of confidence in young Bahamians with verifiable PhDs like Salima Campbell? Or is the government fearful that if they put a young Bahamian in that man's position, their loyalty to this country would compel them to speak out against any questionable activities they might observe in the course of their duties? Does BAMSI have a private bank account, Mr. Speaker? The silence in relation to the BAMSI dormitory fiasco only serves to lend credibility to the public's suspicions in this regard. I called for an accounting of the millions being spent at BAMSI in North Andros to justify this expenditure, while so little is being spent elsewhere in our family islands. If the co-chairs refuse to sit before the Public Accounts Committee to account for their stewardship of the monies under their control, it must be considered unacceptable for them to receive an allocation of $20 million additional to manage a youth program under this new budget. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister on page 16 of his budget communication speaks about long-term planning for national development. I ask the government, how can it be serious about long-term planning when it is continuing to perpetuate a system of having government offices spread all across New Providence, instead of centralizing government services for ease of doing business? I am advised that the government has decided to place its VAT collection headquarters in Carmichael Road, in premises that are allegedly partially owned by the member for Long Island. Is this true, Mr. Speaker? I say again, I am advised that the government has decided to place its VAT collection headquarters in Carmichael Road, or on Carmichael Road, in premises that are allegedly partially owned by the member for Long Island. Is this true, Mr. Speaker? Is this in keeping with sensible planning? If it is true that these offices will be placed in premises partially owned by the member for Long Island, was it done to undermine the member's ability to be an effective spokesperson in challenging the government on fiscal matters and in her criticisms of the government about being partial to friends, family, and lovers? Is there not a plan to centralize government revenue collection, which would improve the ease of doing business on the island of New Providence? Because as it stands, Mr. Speaker, Bahamians are being inconveniently asked to travel here, there, and everywhere to get government business done, because we feel a need to rent premises as a means of serving political agendas. And we wonder why we are slipping in international ease of doing business rankings. Mr. Speaker, I support the urgent review of the Urban Renewal Commission's small home repair program. Why? The reason is that I believe it was a victory for this country's democracy when the members for Bain and Grantstown and Elizabeth, prior to the last general election, were allowed to use the Public Accounts Committee as it was intended to. As it was intended to function, to reveal the embarrassing mismanagement and cost overruns of the New Providence Infrastructural Improvement Project. That information undoubtedly propelled the Progressive Liberal Party to power in 2012. And for this government to deprive the opposition of the same democratic freedom to be their watchdog.
Member for Fort Charlotte.
Sorry.
This government did not do that. The chair made a ruling, and that ruling stands, and it's irrevocable. And based on the ruling of the chair with regards to the PAC and that matter, it would be imprudent to further discuss your views on it in this place.
Yes, sir. Mr. Speaker, I fully respect your authority and your ruling. I would just like to say that in keeping with what you have asked the government, it is my request that the government accede to your ruling and to, in the shortest possible time, bring that report, which has already been completed by the Auditor General, and table it to the same here House, so that the members of the opposition can have the same right that the member for Bain and Grantstown and the member for Elizabeth had in uncovering blatant mismanagement that resulted in the demise of the former FNM administration. The FNM is entitled to no less of a right, and this democracy demands that they have that right.
There's a member stands on a point of order. Chair recognizes member for Bain and Grantstown.
Mr. Speaker, I would not want to interrupt the member, except he called my name, in connection with the actions of the Public Accounts Committee, of which I was the chair. The difference is that I understood what the rules of Parliament were, what the rules governing the committee's actions were, and we scrupulously conducted the affairs of the committee consistent with the rules.
Thank you. Thank you, honourable member. That matter should be left alone.
Yes, sir.
Member for Fort Charlotte, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a political party should never implement laws or policies as government that it does not wish to have imposed upon it while in opposition. If this country's democratic institutions did not work under the former Free National Movement administration via the Auditor General's Office and the Public Accounts Committee, it is very likely that the $100 million in cost overruns of the New Providence Infrastructural Improvement Project would not have been discovered, and the PLP election in 2012 may not have been assured. Mr. Speaker, any strong democracy requires an unimpeachable justice system. In my humble opinion, under this administration, our justice system has been severely undermined by what is probably the most politicized office of the Attorney General in the history of this country. The evidence of this assertion abounds. Examples include the Nolly Prosequi, where a former client of the Attorney General mysteriously had their case before the courts abruptly thrown out, while both the Attorney General and the Minister of Legal Affairs were conveniently out of the country. The allegations of judicial interference by the member for Michael, that the Attorney General did not see a tremendous conflict of interest in disposing of the matter without having the courts consider the merits of the case to disabuse the public that the administration was complicit in actions undertaken to undermine the judicial branch of government. And the decision by the Attorney General to suppress the findings of the Rubis oil spill report by Black and Veatch at the expense of public health and safety. On the matter of the environment, Mr. Speaker, can the government say whether the revenue collected from the environmental levy is going toward environmental protection and remediation? Or was that a clever way of generating more tax revenue under the pretext of protecting the environment? I traveled to Miami last week, and upon takeoff I looked at the waters off Clifton below, and I was able to see a very large oil slick. Are we resigned to allowing this environmental hazard to continue without remediation? Or are we using the environmental levy to fix it? It is clear from this budget that the revenue generated from VAT is not going toward debt reduction. At a time when we have witnessed an increase in the public debt at a rate of 12% per year and 100% since 2005, many Bahamians have expressed concern about the level of government spending. Every member of the governing side that was present during last year's budget vote, with the exception of one member, voted yes to the implementation of a value-added tax. We told the Bahamian people that their financial sacrifice was needed to help us pay down our rapidly growing debt. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that in this budget it is clear that although Bahamian taxpayers were asked to make a hard sacrifice, the government has refused to restrain its own spending and has instead chosen to use those VAT taxes to continue on with its splurge. How did I arrive at that conclusion, Mr. Speaker? If we combine the reduction of $92 million in stamp taxes and the reduction of $67 million in import duties under revenue measures for this fiscal year, we get a total loss of $159 million in tax revenue compared to the same period last year. If we then subtract that $159 million from the $574 million in combined projected VAT and gaming tax revenues expected to be gained during this fiscal year, that equates to an additional $415 million in tax revenue over last fiscal year based on the passage of the value-added tax bills and gaming bills last year. Even with this extra $415 million, the government projects during this fiscal period to have to borrow an additional $197 million. That means, Mr. Speaker, that without the new VAT and gaming tax revenue, we would be running during this fiscal period a deficit of $612 million. Therefore, it is fair to say that this budget is a tax and spend budget, Mr. Speaker. Bahamian political champion, the Honourable Arthur Dion Hanna, said that the PLP's mission was to wipe every tear from every eye. Yet wherever I go, people are crying, Mr. Speaker. Some even wailing about how difficult things are in this economy. The middle class is shrinking. Banks are not lending to small businesses. They are increasing their consumer loan portfolio at the expense of small business sector. And as a result, job creation is not occurring like it needs to for our economy to improve. If anyone gets a job right now, they are more likely to look to the government than the private sector. The only people even mildly satisfied with this economy right now are those extremely well-connected individuals with ties to this government. The facts are that we had 1% economic growth and in an environment of 2% inflation. That is likely to increase with a full year of value-added tax. That is the definition of a shrinking economy. And the reason why the vast majority of Bahamians are crying for economic relief, Mr. Speaker. We are told that the foreign investment climate in the country is robust. Just before the Prime Minister delivered his budget communication, he participated in a contract signing, for the Four Seasons at Cotton Bay Project. We all want to believe, as the Prime Minister is known to say, that hope and help is on the way. That investments and jobs are imminent to stimulate our economically depressed communities, particularly our family island communities. However, I must ask the government, why should we believe that the commencement of the project is imminent? Will the hopeful residents in places like South Eleuthera have their hopefulness rewarded, or will their hopes be dashed? Where are the architectural drawings? And what is the timeline for the start and completion of this project? Without these things, Mr. Speaker, why should the public not question whether the press conference was nothing more than a photo opportunity, conveniently timed to occur just before the Prime Minister delivered his budget communication, to convince the Bahamian people that our economy is growing stronger? Mr. Speaker, I note in the budget communication where it talks about the downtown redevelopment. In every other area, it speaks of how many jobs are going to be created, particularly construction jobs. There's no mention of how many construction jobs are going to be associated with this development being led by China State Construction Company. Mr. Speaker, I know the Prime Minister is under tremendous stress. I know because so much of this government's economic forecast is riding on the success of the Baha Mar project. And right now, I'm sure the Prime Minister has many sleepless nights, and I don't envy him, because the job of Prime Minister in this country has to be the most difficult job of any other job in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And I'm sure right now he's wondering whether the figures in these books are even going to bear out. And in the coming days, he may be going on a plane to China. And because he's a person who, of course, wants to succeed, and he wants to have a strong legacy, the Prime Minister will do all he can to try to salvage whatever he can associated with that project. I have no doubts about that, Mr. Speaker. But the fact remains, I cannot, as a member of this House, support this government giving China State Construction Company any more licenses to construct anything in this country until that Baha Mar project is completed. And I cannot stomach the Bahamian construction workers who live in Fort Charlotte and who live in Bamboo Town and Garden Hills and anywhere else in this country, and even Long Island, who may be coming to this country looking for jobs because they cannot find them in Long Island. I want them to be able to have first dibs. Not the Chinese, not in my country, Mr. Speaker. If the Chinese want to lend us their money, like the Prime Minister said, it must be on our terms. I asked in this place before, who is running this country? The Bahamian government or the Chinese? And I say that not out of disrespect to the Chinese. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, I want to be an individual who learns to be far more diplomatic in my affairs. And Mr. Speaker, the Chinese are obviously a country with tremendous influence and power in this world. And the fact of the matter is that I'm not seeking to belittle the Chinese government, but I am most interested in fighting for my people. Because Bahamian men in this country can't sleep at night because they're being told that they're worthless by their wives and their girlfriends because they have no jobs and no income to be able to support their families. And we know that the construction industry in this country means so much to the strength of this economy. I cannot support, Mr. Prime Minister, through you, Mr. Speaker, I cannot support any license to give the Chinese any more work until Baha Mar is completed. And I cannot support any project that is going to have as little impact on this economy as Baha Mar did through its construction component. We learned a very valuable mistake, Mr. Speaker, and that is that we have a country to build. We cannot build it when we import in such huge numbers foreign laborers to do the work that competent, qualified Bahamians are capable of doing. Junkanoo Carnival was simply a Keynesian economic stimulus program designed to inject taxpayer dollars in hopes of stimulating economic activity in the midst of the ongoing economic slowdown. The F&M did it with the New Providence Infrastructural Improvement Program by investing taxpayer dollars in needed infrastructural works to create jobs during the Great Recession. It was at a time when construction had come to a halt and the government sought to create employment for construction workers who were hurt by the 2008 housing crash. The PLP recognizes, even if senior members like the chairman of the PLP and Mr. Franklin Wilson refuse to admit it, but privately the PLP recognizes that the economy is still struggling mightily. Bahamas Junkanoo Carnival was more than just an elaborate and expensive party, Mr. Speaker. It was intended to be a way for the government to provide employment for its members. Excuse me. It was intended to be a way for the government to provide employment for members of the cultural community. To do what the F&M did with the road project, albeit on a smaller scale. The concern that I have is that while we have spent as much as $12 million on the Bahamas Junkanoo Carnival for a 3-day celebration that had an as yet to be determined economic impact, we are informed that the government cannot find monies to pay the salaries of newly graduated doctors who wish to enter the public service. At a time when many of our family islands do not have a resident physician to provide health care for Bahamians living in those communities. The cries of the member for Mangrove Key and South Andros.
Point of order, member for North Andros and the Berries. Point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to rebut the statement made by Fort Charlotte that the 37 doctors who graduated will be paid, and there's no issue with the payment for these doctors. I don't know where you got those facts.
Thank you, honourable member. Member for Fort Charlotte.
Thank you for the minister's intervention, Mr. Speaker. I just wish to say, in completing my thought, that the cries of the member for Mangrove Key and South Andros for a doctor, for the people he represents, have fallen on deaf ears. The member for North Andros and the Berry Islands has said that these doctors will be paid. I do not believe that the birthplace of the PLP, Lyndon Pindling's constituency, ought to be neglected any longer. How is it that we can still justify not putting a resident doctor on that settlement to serve the needs of those people? All I ask is, even if you wish, confirm that the member is going to receive a doctor through the Speaker.
The member yields. Member for North Andros.
If you were here with my budget speech, you would have heard me say we're going to have a doctor in every family island, including South Andros. And one in Berry Island. Absolutely. And Gat Island. And San Salvador.
I said every island.
I said every.
Every island.
So come to the House.
Say that.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you, Honourable Member. Member for Fort Charlotte.
Thank you, Honourable Member for North Andros and the Berry Islands.
Go back to the script now, please.
Mr. Speaker, my purpose was only in ensuring that these unserved family island communities receive the critical health care services that they sorely need. The poor state of the economy still requires Keynesian economic stimulus programs, Mr. Speaker, which is further evidenced by this budget's allocation of $20 million for the Youth Jobs Program I referenced earlier. In the interests of gaining a full appreciation for the real state of affairs pertaining to Baha Mar, Mr. Speaker, through you, I wish to ask the Minister of Finance whether any of that $20 million is earmarked to preserve the jobs of Baha Mar workers who may be threatened with being furloughed as a result of the delayed opening. With an economy which, according to the IMF's 2015 Article 4 consultation, has still not returned to pre-recession levels, can we really say that we are a stronger Bahamas? The incontrovertible evidence is that our economy is still quite weak and in need of government stimulus to prevent the economy's bottom from dropping out. It is certain that the challenges at Baha Mar do nothing but worsen the short-term economic forecast for the Bahamas, and evidence that the job of reversing unemployment generally and youth unemployment specifically will be challenged even longer than earlier forecast. Mr. Speaker, the 31% rate of unemployment for our nation's youth is a serious threat to our nation's future and efforts to stem the growing problem of crime and poverty. I refer to an article in the Tribune dated Tuesday, March 29, 2011, and it reads as follows. The PLP as a government will make an unprecedented focus on investment in our young people, the likes of which this country will have never seen. Who can ignore the unemployment that exists where people are reduced now to begging for food to eat because they have no work, and sleeping in cars because they cannot pay the rent? Mr. Christie told the media at a press conference at PLP headquarters on Sunday in a article written by Noel Nichols, then Tribune staff reporter. March 29, 2011. Clearly, the government recognizes the state of despair among our nation's youth. Hopefully, this $20 million program and a rebound in our macroeconomic conditions will help to make a sizable dent in the level of youth unemployment and crime in our country. Mr. Speaker, in this place, and I'm 39 years old, Mr. Speaker, I have to consider myself the second youngest in this House next to the member for North Eleuthera. I have to be in here as a fighter for the young people. I'm not perfect, and there's a lot of things I wish I had done already, things that I've not done. But as I've said in this House on every occasion that I could, I have to come in this place and use my voice to fight for the people who put me in this place. And the young people are crying for work. And if we intend for crime to be brought under control, it is inconsistent, Mr. Speaker, with a high unemployment rate as high as 31% of our nation's youth. An economy so dependent on tourism cannot survive economically if it is overrun by violent crime. The high rate of violent crime in our country is threatening the future viability of tourism as the driver of our economy. In a December 11, 2014 article in Yahoo News by Melinda Crow entitled "The Worst Caribbean Ports Have Called for Cruises," First on the list was Nassau and Freeport. And the narrative read as follows. And I'm reading this, Mr. Speaker, even though I know some people don't like to hear bad things. But the fact of the matter is we need to know what people are putting on the internet to propagate about this country that we love so much to the rest of the world. Because hopefully when we realize what they're saying, we'll take the job much more seriously of trying to deal with this crime problem. I cannot believe that we would try to close this debate without allowing the minister responsible for crime to speak on crime during this budget. That is absolutely incomprehensible and unacceptable. The article read as follows. All the islands of the Bahamas have fallen under crime warnings from the United States State Department this year, with armed robberies, kidnappings, and rapes in Nassau on New Providence Island. According to a recent security report from the U.S. Department of State Bureau of Diplomatic Security, the weapon of choice on Grand Bahama Island is a machete. Even I don't believe that, Mr. Speaker. Even I don't believe that, Minister for Grand Bahama. But this is what they're saying. And this is why we have to arrest this crime problem, because the more the statistics show that violent crime is out of control, they're allowed to get away with saying these things. In the port of Freeport, the problems also include lack of infrastructure. They talk about how there's nothing but a senior frogs and a few overpriced shops. Mr. Speaker, as much effort as we hear of going on to try to resuscitate Grand Bahama's economy, surely we have to ensure that these kinds of commentaries are not allowed to be perpetrated or propagated without a response and without ensuring that they're proven false. This is what the world reads when when people research vacations on the internet, Mr. Speaker. This is the first thing that comes up. We need to get some young people inside the Ministry of Tourism, working in these small rooms, on the internet, fashioning public relations information. We don't need people from Canada coming to this country to do that.
Point of order. Member yields. Shall recognize member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Mr. Speaker, the member is referring to an article that we are so familiar with, and the individual who is questionable, and the articles that he writes. I wish not to go there. But the truth is, Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier today, the cruise lines are to have a news conference in the Bahamas, during which time you would hear a contradictory story to what they are reported in that story. And for young people in the digital world, in our pits, they're all young people. We have all Bahamians working in our pits. In fact, you know many of them here in the Bahamas and also in the United States. In fact, our director responsible for digital is younger than you. And he is in Plantation. And here in New Providence, all our young people. And we're utilizing more, in fact, bringing more on. So we are with you.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Thank you for that, Mr. Tourism. But obviously, there's much work to be done. While reasonable Bahamians all agree that crime should not be politicized, any right-thinking citizen expects that the responsibility of fixing crime is the job of the government. There is no doubt about that, Mr. Speaker. In that same article that I quoted from March 29, 2011, the Prime Minister, then leader of the opposition, said, and I quote, "No matter how the FNM tells the story, the themes of this election will be pride in Bahamians and the Bahamas, unemployment and crime. Who can overlook the murder on our streets every weekend?" Mr. Speaker, these problems have not gone away. So I am hopeful that I will be hearing, and others in the country will be hearing, about exactly what plans are afoot, if not, of course, in detail, but to reassure the public that things is going to change, because we cannot continue on the path we are headed, Mr. Speaker. If we accuse the FNM of being paralyzed by crime, how do we explain the Prime Minister's quote that he is subjected to walking on eggshells in trying to end the madness on our streets? I join all Bahamians in hoping that the Prime Minister takes control of the armed forces, because after all, we live in a country with a civilian-controlled military, where the ultimate offer reassurance is that the executive is still in control of our local armed forces. As I have said in this place many times before, unless we arrest violent crime, we will not experience a turnaround in our economic fortunes. Mr. Speaker, on the subject of Bahamas Air, what is the budget for simulator training expected to be? And this is why I'm hopeful that the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador will speak on his budget contribution. But what is the budget for simulator training expected to be if the purchase of new French aircraft will require that pilots travel to and stay in Paris, France for training when they currently travel a much shorter distance to Atlanta for training? Atlanta is much closer and a much less costly destination than Paris. Hence, one would expect the training budget to increase dramatically along with the purchase of these new aircraft. Is this in the airline's long-term interest? Why have we sought to purchase aircraft that will increase these costs at a time when the government has sought to justify not paying pilots increases that were negotiated under the terms of their labor agreements? Cost of real estate is out of the reach of the average Bahamian, Mr. Speaker. Instead of aspiring to own their own homes, most Bahamians are finding it impossible to afford a property to build on. How is this reality consistent with a stronger Bahamas? If the PLP, which claims to believe in empowering Bahamians, were really serious about building a stronger Bahamas, it would have used this term to immediately repeal the Quieting Titles Act and implement a proper system of land registration in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Instead, we are content to allow persons with access to lawyers to use this access to enrich themselves at the expense of others. What I resent the most about politics in our country is that at the level of the executive, where all power resides, there is far greater interest in plotting to win elections than there is in doing the real work necessary to build a stronger country. As I said during the mid-year budget, this country's financial services industry has shrunk. Evidence of that can be found in the budget estimates for revenue from bank and trust company fees, which are projected to decrease by almost 20% this fiscal period. According to an article in the Nassau Guardian's business section of Wednesday, June 10, by Jeffrey Brown, a copy of which I have here, under the headline, Financial Services Job Security at All-Time Low, it quotes Bahamas Institute of Financial Services Director Kim Bodie as follows: job security in the financial services industry is at an all-time low. I can tell you that. From where I sit, I hear and see it every day. The article continues. She questioned what was being done on the ground to address the level of unemployment in the Bahamas' financial services sector. We are really hurting. This industry is not what it used to be. And we need to have an open national debate on how we are going to fill the gap of what is really happening in the financial services sector. Mr. Speaker, all of the Canadian-owned foreign banks have been consolidating their operations and downsizing their staffs, resulting in many Bahamians losing good-paying jobs. RBC, Scotiabank, and FCIB have employees who to this day are still afraid that they won't be in their job tomorrow. I am made to understand that very quietly, approximately 40 employees of the Bank of the Bahamas have been laid off over the last few months. For many of the persons working in this demanding industry, Mr. Speaker, the fear that these Bahamian professionals have of losing their jobs is only adding to the stress that they experience performing their jobs. It is not a laughing matter, Mr. Speaker, but apparently the word in banking circles is that the only financial services jobs gained under this administration were those claimed by the PLP Member of Parliament for Elizabeth and a recently resigned PLP Senator. I ask the question, a stronger Bahamas for whom, Mr. Speaker? Meanwhile, that same PLP MP in his budget contribution last week was lobbying the government to quickly negotiate a tax information exchange agreement with Colombia so that he, along with his new employer, could generate personal and corporate profits from the creation of a new Latin American market for the investment condominium portfolio. That same investment condominium portfolio, or rather that same investment condominium legislation that the member raced through this honorable House for passage before he abruptly quit his cabinet post to go and work in the same industry for which he designed the product. Forget about calling him Ryan the Lion. He is Ryan the lobbyist.
Member, no, that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. Member, the chair gonna, you have to withdraw that remark.
I withdraw, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, he is being paid, the member for Elizabeth is being paid to lobby the government on behalf of a private bank on the public's dime. Further to that, the member for Seabreeze, the now Minister of Financial Services, said during her budget contribution that 5 investment condominiums, the legislation that he abruptly raced through this House, that 5 investment condominiums have so far been formed. How many of those are being managed by Deltec Bank, Mr. Speaker? A stronger Bahamas for whom, Mr. Speaker? The government contract bidding system is in urgent need of reform if we are to protect the public purse. According to an article by Nikki Kelly, the recent awarding of a government contract warrants government explanation. According to her article, Data Talk was one of 4 shortlisted companies vying to receive a government contract for the Road Traffic Department's technology upgrade project. According to Nikki Kelly, they submitted a $4.3 million bid on June 10, 2014, and on May 2015 were awarded the contract at a cost of $8.3 million, double the cost to taxpayers of their original bid for the same scope of works. Mr. Speaker, there is an urgent need for legislation that mandates the electronic publication of all bids for government contracts in excess of $1 million, inclusive of the principals of the firms involved in these bids. We must increase the level of accountability and transparency in the awarding of government contracts, Mr. Speaker. It is the oppressive tax policies of successive governments that has created the enormous demand for wrecked cars and used cars in the Bahamas. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Christie criticized local banks for charging Bahamians excessive interest rates in their consumer lending and said that these banks were responsible for turning Bahamians into modern-day slaves. It is easy to blame local banks for the misery being experienced by Bahamian consumers, but we cannot ignore the role that hefty customs duties play in influencing Bahamian consumers' choice in car imports. Those excessive interest rates being charged by banks on consumer loans are being charged on top of the unacceptably high rates of duty that have caused struggling Bahamians in this depressed economy to move away from new car purchases in favor of wrecked cars and used cars out of necessity and not by choice. I support any initiative to make the streets of our country safer, as this reform effort is purported to be intended to do. However, Mr. Speaker, we cannot fault Bahamian taxpayers for trying to survive economically by looking for ways to afford the purchase of a vehicle when we as a government refuse to give the tax relief that will allow them to purchase safer vehicles and refuse to introduce a safe and reliable public transportation system. I urge the Minister of Finance to show that he is not prepared to continue to have motor vehicle import duties make modern-day slaves of our people by bringing to this House a bill that reduces the rate of duty on all motor vehicle imports to 15% across the board. In fact, I am in favor of a uniform reduction of all tax duties in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to 15% across the board and impose stiff penalties for all offenders, such as fines in excess of the rate of duty. Customs revenue would increase significantly if we did these 2 things, Mr. Speaker. If we are serious about building a stronger Bahamas, it is imperative that we establish a less onerous tariff regime. If the government sticks to its new policy initiatives on the importation of used and damaged vehicles, without simultaneously lowering the rate of duty on new car imports, it is unfairly targeting working-class Bahamians who are having difficulty surviving in this poor economy, and the government will be accused, rightly or wrongly, of trying to oppress working-class Bahamians to further empower rich Bahamian car salesmen. I'm wrapping up, Mr. Speaker. What we need now is not a catchy commercial with a little boy telling us about what constitutes a stronger Bahamas. We need our Prime Minister to stand before the press and answer questions about what is being done to address those things that are making the Bahamas weak. like violent crime, unemployment, and the lack of economic activity precipitating the decline in the size of the middle class. The electorate will never consider good-sounding political ads to be an acceptable substitute for meaningful political action. We don't need to hear from the little boy in the ad talking about something that he would like to see in his future. Rather, we need the Prime Minister to step up to the microphone and explain to us the realities of our present predicament. The only person who would argue that we are living in a stronger Bahamas are partisan politicians or public relations specialists, either detached from reality or prepared to ignore the truth because they are paid to spin the facts to promote propaganda. Ask the man or woman on the street if they feel things are better in our country, or if they feel the Bahamas is getting stronger. I am willing to bet that the vast majority of them would tell you that in their eyes things are getting worse. There is more crime and fewer jobs. That is the reality, Mr. Speaker. So in my view, spending some $3.8 million on a Stronger Bahamas campaign is money poorly spent because Bahamians don't believe that things are getting better. That $3.8 million would be better spent trying to reduce crime, create jobs, or support social services to help the poor. I draw the public's attention to the budget heads for the Department of Social Services. And contrary to what the country has been told, I was expecting, like all other Bahamians who've been paying attention, that there would be a $30 million increase in the social safety net to complement the implementation of value-added tax, to support the poor who would be negatively impacted by the implementation of value-added tax. Yet in budget head, in relation to Department of Social Services, the allocation has been decreased in this budget cycle by $5.5 million. There has been much discussion about my political future and whether I intend to depart the PLP. There is all of this speculation about me being interested in forming a new political party. I want to dispel that idea outright, sir. And I also want to say, for the record, that I had no intention of coming in here tonight to offer any resignation. Our country's future, Mr. Speaker, is too important for me to entertain any thought of experimenting with a new political party. It is clear to me and to many Bahamians, I believe, that this government needs a strong and focused opposition to ensure that the interests of our country are protected. We are reaping this poor harvest in part because the government does not fear this opposition and does not feel threatened by them. Hence, it is behaving with the arrogance of a dictatorship. I'm finishing right now, Mr. Speaker.
Wrap up.
Doing as it pleases without any accountability or transparency. This government needs a unified political opposition if it is to have any chance of effectively governing our country between now and the next general election. It means, Mr. Speaker, that egos must be checked, and those who really mean this country well must put their differences aside and become a unified force if this country is to become the strong country we need it to be. We need a cohesive opposition force, not multiple opposition parties pulling in opposite directions. This country will not be well served by a divided and weak opposition, faced with a government prepared to run roughshod over dissenting voices and opposition groups, and which has no regard for the established democratic norms of accountability and transparency.
In closing.
And in closing, Mr. Speaker, to quote the great William Shakespeare, parting is such sweet sorrow that I should bid good night till it be morrow.
Thank you.
I resign as a member of the Progressive Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker, because it is clear to me that there is no interest in having me be a part of the Progressive Liberal Party. And I would be a fool to come back in this place and say that I'm a member of the PLP after how I was treated in here tonight.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
So thank you to the people of Fort Charlotte for the privilege to
Thank you,
serve.
Honourable Member.
And may God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you.